Okay, let's see if this works. I'll try and turn on the light. Okay. So hopefully, hopefully this live streaming will work better than the other approaches that we tried with Zoom and with Teams. Okay, so we have 5 minutes, which is hopefully enough time for me to work out what I'm doing, how to share the content. Okay. So, okay, good. Let's see. So, manage. So we have participants. We have the possibility. Hello. Good morning, Elzbieta. Good morning. We have just a couple of minutes. And I try to work out what I'm doing with this live stream. Okay. So hopefully we'll have less technical issues than we had the previous time. And the nice thing is that the number of viewers, it should be unlimited on this. And I think the quality should be even better as well. So webcam, manage. Okay. So we have the slides, presentation number 8. And I'll try and copy this. Boom, boom, boom. So I think, okay, in the chat function, we can just have the Q&A as normal. So thanks to the comment from Elzbieta, I can see that that at least works. And I'm thinking what I can do is I'll attach the presentation, presentation number 8, because we still have 1 more minute until we're meant to begin. And lecture 8. 8, early morning show. Okay, we have a few more people joining us. Okay. And 1 second. Just wait another maybe minute. I work out how to hopefully this will work. So, dear colleagues, please find presentation for lecture 8 and put that by email. Okay, good. All right. So I think we can basically begin. All right, so today we're going to continue the early morning show. And in the topic of legal business development, we will continue the topic of sales writing. We've already done the first 3 lectures on sales writing. So today is the 4th and final part of sales writing. We saw in the previous chapters, we saw in the previous broadcasts, in broadcast number 1, we reached the concept of IDA, which was, I think, one of the key ideas at all from sales writing, that when you are reaching out to a client, an ex-client, a new client, whoever, we can use the IDA structure in order to engage with them. We saw the difference between informational writing and sales writing, that in informational writing, we might make people aware of what we're talking about, and we might make them interested even, but usually that's where we stop. That's informational writing. And that's the main mistake that most of the lawyers and the law firms are making in the writing activities that they do. So the newsletters, the legal updates, the emails, it's informational writing. You may make people aware, hopefully make them interested, and you give them information. What's missing between informational writing and sales writing is that in the sales writing, we take it a couple of steps further. We have not just awareness and interest, but we make them desire a solution, and then we make them take action. So this is how the sales writing mainly differs. We need to have a product, something that we're actually offering, and we need to have a call to action to drive the reader to then take an action which we want. That's why it's called the IDA structure: awareness, interest, desire, action. Then in lecture number 2 in sales writing, we looked at what do you do depending on the responses that you get from the recipients. We saw that there are 4 outcomes of a pitch. We can have a hire, which is when our IDA works and they engage us. We can have a fire, where they say no thank you. We can have an advance, where they don't hire us or fire us, but it's some kind of progress, some kind of step forward. An advance will become a hire or a fire. And then we have the 4th outcome, which is called a continuation. And this is where the recipient of your IDA basically doesn't respond at all. They go quiet. We saw that when you do pitching with an IDA, this is the most common situation, which is basically no answer at all. We saw that this is much worse than a fire, because you need to then follow up. You need to chase them. You need to see what's going on. Did they get that message? Are they interested? Are they thinking it? Is silence really a rejection or not? So we saw the concept of the nuclear option, that once you send your IDA pitch and you have given a call to see if they got it, then maybe after a week you email them again to see if they got it. Then finally, you yourself convert that IDA, that pitch, from a continuation into a fire. So you say to them, hey, I wrote to you some time ago regarding such and such a value proposition. I didn't hear back from you. If you want to come back to us, then if you want to continue this, then contact me. So that's the nuclear option. And the idea is that you use this in order to stop becoming annoying, to stop harassing them, and that it actually quite often provokes a response. And if you don't get a response, you then move on. So you cut your losses. So I think this also relates quite nicely to the 30-day rule, that for anything that you do in legal business development, it doesn't matter if it's you sent someone an IDA pitch in sales writing, or you got someone's business card at a network event, or you did a webinar, or whatever you want to do, that if you don't have a result within a month, and nothing's happened, then basically nothing is going to happen. So, you have to strike while the iron is hot. Then in lecture 3 of sales writing, we went into a little bit more detail about the other kind of elements that you can put into your IDA pitch. And what I mean by an element is that every single sentence in your writing is there for a reason, and every single sentence has a purpose from a sales writing perspective. So the salutation element is how you begin. It's how you begin the email. And you need to be careful not to make mistakes there. You always use a salutation. So it could be, dear Mr. McVeigh, for example, if you're writing to me. It could be, dear John, if we have a closer relationship. But it's very important to it's very, very important to at least have a salutation. Then we saw a personalization element. We saw the Duracell element. We saw Oggy's element. And I think you can get quite creative with this. Every single sentence in your sales writing, in your email, for example, has a purpose. Personalization element is to build goodwill and rapport with the reader. Oggy's element is to demonstrate that you are driving the relationship and you have everything under control. So that gives you credibility, and they're more likely to listen to you, and you drive that relationship. You have the Duracell element, which is good to use in the awareness or the interest part of your presentation, because that is like a provocation. And again, guys, if you don't remember the information from the previous first, second, and third broadcasts on sales writing about these different elements, remember, we do have the presentations, we have the slides, we have the transcripts. You can look at them and you can review. So today we're going to take the ideas a little bit further, and you should have, maybe somebody could kindly confirm in the chat, you should already have in your email the presentation for today. And I've sent you the pictogram version, which is the version I use for presenting. It doesn't have the text slides because I'm going to tell you. And then afterwards, if you want the text version, you let me know. And yeah, thank you, Austra, you have it. Okay, so again, I have a little issue here that I can't share my screen. So I can't show you the slides. What we're going to do in that case, because you have the slides in your computer, I will open the slides, and I would like you to do the same. And I will tell you the slide number, and you can just listen to me as we go through it. So if you go to slide number 5 in the presentation, you can see the key concepts of lecture number 8. And like always, we have 16 key concepts. And on slide 5, you can see the little pictograms and the names of the concepts which we're going to cover today. So today I got a few requests. Okay. I got a few requests after our last broadcast about some of the things I had been talking about, even from the concept of legal writing. So we're going to cover a few of those to begin with. We're going to look at the SVO rule, which stands for subject, verb, object. We're going to come back to that creature called shall, and we're going to look at the UOU rule of passive voice. So we're going to do a little bit of legal writing analysis from the context of sales writing. We'll be seeing what's the difference between copywriting and content writing. Then further, we take a step back. We see that for a successful IDA, for successful sales writing, to be blunt, you basically need to have a big idea. You need to have something which is interesting to catch the attention of the reader. Your big idea needs to be not simply the unique value proposition that you're offering, but you need to be able to explain it and communicate it very clearly and concisely. We're going to look at the different concepts regarding how to do the IDA pitches. Should you do one and make it really bespoke and targeted and send it to a single target audience, like a sniper? Or should you do several and you just change the names in order to get a nice response, kind of like a machine gun? So how many pitches should you be doing in an email campaign? We're going to see that we're not lawyers, we're trusted business partners. We need to understand well who's our target audience. We're going to look at the different degrees of conversion that we can do. And then there's a few other final concepts that we're going to be covering as well, such as personalization, storytelling, examining the cost of mail shot, seeing a micro pitch, and then finally we'll conclude today by trying to understand what is RRR, which is a reflexive rejection response, which is when somebody basically isn't listening to you at all, or your AIDA, and how do you deal with that? So that's the key concepts we're going to be looking at today. Now, if I can ask you to look at the slide, this should be slide number 6, if I'm not mistaken. This is the SVO rule. Yeah, okay. So, first of all, in terms of the content of your sales writing, it doesn't matter if it's the email or if it's the article, you should follow the SVO rule, which means you stick to subject, verb, object. You don't get creative. In some languages, there's a certain flexibility. You can put subjects, verbs, and objects in different orders. In good legal writing, and especially in good sales writing, simplicity and clarity of communication is very important. So you don't mess up and don't play around with the order of subject, verb, object. So for example, if I write a sentence like, the lawyer wrote a contract, that's subject, verb, object. The lawyer is the subject, they're the person that we're talking about. Writing is the verb, is the action that they're doing. And the contract is the object, that's what receives the action. The lawyer wrote the contract. We stick to that order. And this means that if you have a time expression, for example, your time expression is always before or after the SVO. So you could say yesterday, comma, the lawyer wrote the contract. Or on the other hand, you could say the lawyer wrote the contract yesterday with a comma. Yeah. So time expression you can put before or after the SVO. And we can make things a little bit more complicated. We can begin to play with the SVO to make more sophisticated structures if we want to. So you could say SVO, comma, conjunction, SVO. The lawyer wrote the contract, comma, and the paralegal signed it, for example. In this case, you have two SVOs. We put a comma between them and we attach a conjunction. So that's how you can connect the two SVOs. Conjunction can be and, but, or because. So again, you can connect two SVOs to make a more complex sentence, but you avoid a very common mistake that lawyers do, who are non-native English speakers, which is SVO, comma, SVO. That's called a comma splice. It's where you're putting a comma where you shouldn't be putting one. So you cannot have SVO, comma, SVO. Another thing that you mustn't do in the SVO rule is you don't put information between your subjects and your verbs and your objects. You keep that together. And sometimes you can see this in examples of kind of formalistic, archaic legal writing. You know, you could say the lawyer, comma, who had many years of experience, comma, wrote, comma, with great skill and ability, comma, the contract. In this case, we have S, some kind of embedding between commas, V, another kind of embedding between commas, and O. My advice is basically don't. don't do that. You don't want to split information inside your SVOs. So that's basically the SVO rule. Make it simple. Actually, that's another rule. Keep it simple, silly. You don't want to make long, complicated structures. And one of the worst things that you can do in legal writing, and this applies to sales writing, is directly translate a long, complex sentence from your own language into English. Because then you'll have this horrible long structure with lots of commas, and you're almost guaranteed to get it wrong. And like I mentioned before, you really should have comma phobia. You need to be very careful with the commas. Commas are much more complicated, much more difficult than we realize. So you should only really use a comma if you're 100% of how you're doing it. Keep it simple. You know, you can have SVO, full stop, SVO, full stop, SVO. Yeah, so we don't do long, complex sentences. I remember I was doing some training a few years ago in Paris, in France. This was with DLA Piper. And I was speaking to the French lawyers, and we were doing a business development, we were doing a sales writing training session. And the problem was they had this beautiful language. It was so long and flowery and descriptive and lovely. I think it was probably how they would write in French, and they did the same in English. Totally wrong from a legal English and sales writing perspective. Too complicated, too many complex sentences, too many commas. So sorry, don't do that. I understand that your writing might not be as poetic and beautiful if you take this approach of simply following SVO and simplicity, but it will have a lot of legal weight and simplicity and less chance of you messing up and getting yourself into bother. So that's the SVO rule. Next, slide number 7. I already mentioned this before, but I'll go on to this a little bit more. Shall. Basically, don't. I'm using shall as an example of an archaism. Archaism, these are the words which only lawyers use. And they're archaic. So hence, to forth, then under, hereafter, the former, the latter, all of that stuff, just don't. So don't use archaisms. You need to have plain, simple English, plain, simple business English that the common man should understand. The best sales writing doesn't sound like it was written by a lawyer. The best lawyer doesn't sound like a lawyer, unlike in the movies. And this means even shall you shouldn't be using. So why shouldn't you use shall? Shall is ambiguous. You know, some people could say that shall has the meaning someone has a duty to or is obliged to. But then lawyers in different countries and lawyers in the same countries, they use it with different meanings and to different degrees of strengths. There is this legal reference which is called Words and Phrases, and they have 76 pages just about cases interpreting shall. So shall is very ambiguous. You might think that you are communicating and you understand what you're saying with it, but it can be misinterpreted. So shall is an example of an archaism which can lead to conflict and disputes. And nobody speaks like that. Again, no one says, you shall finish the project in a week. This isn't a Jane Austen book. We don't speak like that. Also, you mustn't use, when we're talking about verbs or modal verbs, you can't use must and you can't use have to. Must is for internal obligation. I must do the work because I want to. Have to is for external obligation. I have to do the work because my boss told me to. In legal writing and in sales writing, it's better not to use must or have to, because we're not talking here about internal or external obligations. We're talking about the probability or necessity of an action. So what can you use instead of shall? You can use present simple. Party A will pay party B. You can use future, that's future simple. You can use future simple. Party A will pay party B. You can use to be to. Party A is to pay party B. And you can use present simple. Party A pays party B. So you shouldn't be using party A shall pay party B. And while we're talking about it, not only shouldn't you be using shall or these other archaisms, you shouldn't be using any Latinisms either. So no Latin, because not everyone's going to be able to understand it. That's important not just in legal writing, that's very important in sales writing, because in the sales writing, we're trying to make someone aware of what we're talking, make them interested, make them desire our solution, and then take an action to do what we're recommending them to actually do. So even etc., even i.e., you shouldn't be using these either. Moving on, if you look at the next slide, slide number 8, we can see another rule called the UOU rule. I think you like this rule because this is about passive voice. And my advice for good writing is simply don't use passive voice. So for example, coming back to that sentence which I mentioned to you, the lawyer wrote the contract. That is active voice. The subject does something to the object. Yeah, we're focusing on the subject, the actor. On the other hand, if you want to make the object the focus of what we're talking about, you could say the contract was written by the subject. That's passive voice. Something was done by somebody. For some reason, in all of the different countries where I've been working with lawyers tend to love using passive voice. I'm not sure why. Maybe it just sounds really cool. Something is to be done, something will be done, something has been done. We don't like passive voice because passive voice has ambiguity. Maybe that's also why we like to use it sometimes as lawyers, because it has some kind of diminished necessity in terms of the clarity of obligation. I give you an example. If I say, I owe you, no, I can say, I will pay you 100 euros. That's clear. You're going to get 100 euros from me. If I say to you, 100 euros will be paid to you, by whom? So this is risky. So the simple advice here is don't use passive voice unless the subject is unknown, obvious, or unimportant. So that's an acronym. That's why it stands for UOU. What do I mean by this? If we say, for example, somebody burgled the property, that's a bit weird. We have an unknown subject. We don't actually know who the subject was. So it's strange to say somebody burgled the property. If you have an unknown subject, you can use passive voice. The property was burgled. That would be an exception where we can use passive voice. If a subject is obvious, you wouldn't say the judge makes judgments in court. It's kind of obvious that if you're in court, it's going to be the judge making the judgments. So you would say judgments are made in court. So we can use passive voice when we have an obvious subject as well. Or the last example is when you have an unimportant subject. The police interviewed witnesses. Maybe it's not that important who interviewed the witnesses. It's more important about what happened. So you would say witnesses were interviewed. Here, the subject is unimportant. So we can take the rule regarding passive voice on to two levels. Make life easy for yourself. Don't use passive voice. Full stop. No passive voice, no problems. On the other hand, if you really want to use passive voice, only use it if it follows the UOU rule. If you can justify that the subject is unknown, obvious, or unimportant, then you can legitimately use the passive voice. But again, be careful with this, because typically lawyers in all sorts of different countries are throwing around passive voice here and there without any justification under the UOU rule. It creates complex grammatical structures. It creates ambiguity in terms of who's going to do the actions. So it's not good for legal writing, and in the same light, it's not good for sales writing. So that's the UOU rule. Now, if you look at slide number 9, I think it's important to take a step back and to understand that in our writing, I mean, there's lots of different types of writing that we do as lawyers. I've rather critically mentioned what I call informational writing, which is where we simply give information to clients. Typically, a newsletter is informational writing. We make the client aware of something, maybe we make them interested. I've contrasted this to sales writing, where you have awareness, interest, desire, and action. However, we can also look at our writing in terms of copywriting and content writing. So copywriting is the type of writing that you're going to use in advertising or marketing content. The purpose of copywriting is to drive sales or to drive a specific action. The main action I want you to do, the main action I want you to get from your clients is getting meetings. So we would use copywriting in emails, landing pages, sales letters using either format. That's copywriting. And a lot of these different sales elements that I was talking about, you would put that into copywriting. Content writing, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Content writing, I think you're more likely to see this in articles. This is when we have content which is to entertain, educate, or inform a target audience. You would see content writing in terms of blogs, ebooks, white papers, informational web pages. So content writing, this does have a purpose, but be careful that it actually doesn't slip into being informational writing. If you're going to do content writing for some kind of interesting article, avoid it becoming informational writing, which is quite dry, technical, legalistic, boring. And make sure that you're clear about, if you're not doing copywriting, if your purpose isn't to get meetings and your purpose is content writing, what is it that you actually want to do? Is it to entertain? Is it to educate? Is it to inform? Is it to convert suspects into prospects, or prospects into qualified prospects? So these two types of writing, copywriting and content writing, are quite different. You need different skills and different techniques as a lawyer to do these different types of writing. So we can think that informational writing is the worst, and we want to avoid that. And we're going to split the informational writing into copywriting, like our either emails, our websites, sales letters, and we're driving that to get the results. Or we're changing the informational writing into the content writing, which is entertaining, educating, informing, or shocking. A good copywriter isn't necessarily a good content writer, and vice versa. In the content writing, you can be a little bit more creative. you can and you should show your personality as a lawyer in your writing. So it should be in a kind of conversational voice. It should sound like it's coming from you and not from some robot, so that your content writing should stand out and make a good impression. I'm just remembering, guys, a few years ago, again, I was in Belgrade and I had a really nice group of Serbian lawyers. Again, we were doing actually legal writing rather than sales writing. And I asked them to write an example email. And the problem was, afterwards, when I looked at these emails that had been written, they were all basically identical. There was nothing which differentiated them from one another. So they were definitely not copywriting. They weren't trying to get any kind of sales or meetings. They were informational writing, and it wasn't good content writing. There was no personalization. You didn't touch the soul of the author. So I thought that really was a pity. And I think some of the law firms, they even encourage a certain homogeneity in terms of the writing style. And the email that comes from the law firm, it might not matter if it comes from this lawyer or that lawyer or that lawyer. It's going to be very dry and very impersonal. In fact, I've even seen the worst case scenario, also in Serbia, where you would have some of the correspondence going to the clients, and it's not clear even who the lawyer is. This is our legal advisory coming from the firm. So I think that's a really, really, really bad idea. So yeah, pay attention to define for yourself if you're doing copywriting, like sales writing or content writing, and then what is the objective you want to get from your writing. And don't make it dry and impersonal. Now, if you go to slide number 10, I've mentioned before that when you are doing sales writing, it doesn't matter if you're doing an email to a client or potential client. It doesn't matter if you're doing an article and you're going to send that article to a large audience. The heart of your sales writing is what you're offering. It's the desire. What is your value proposition? What is the product or solution that you're offering? Without that, you cannot have sales writing. You have to have something to offer. Now, guys, to be blunt, to be honest, what I see, at least in Europe, is that most of the law firms, they don't actually do proactive pitching. They don't come up with some ideas and proactively, at their own initiative, reach out to the clients and propose something at all. They're just reactive. So that's really bad. Next, what I often see is law firms being market-driven, having a market-driven UVP, which means the law firm or the practice, they wait until there's some kind of change or update in the law, and then they use that as the legitimization or the justification of reaching out to their clients or potential clients. So they would say something like, I give you an example of the AIDA. They would say, "Dear James," that's salutation. "I hope you had a nice weekend." That's personalization, which is very important. Awareness. From 1st of January 2023, such and such a law is going to change. So we made them aware. Interest. This is important to you, James, because if you don't comply with this law, you'll be fined €1 million. So that's telling me why I should care about this law. Desire. So for this reason, we have created the regulatory health check, which I would like to suggest to you, because this will give you peace of mind that you don't have any risk or exposure. So you have something to offer. That's the desire section. And the last sentence, therefore, how about we do Tuesday at 2:00 for lunch? Awareness, interest, desire, action. Okay, so with best regards, and then the name. So that's an example of an AIDA, but this is a market-driven AIDA. This is the most common type of sales writing. We're waiting for something to happen in the law to give us a reason to write to the client. Very bad idea for many reasons. First, the law doesn't change when you want it to change. So you might have to wait a long time until there's a change in the law in your practice area. Secondly, a lot of the changes in the law are not actually that important for clients. So you can have a change in the law. It doesn't mean it's going to have any kind of real commercial impact on the clients. And clients know it. Clients get a little bit suspicious when lawyers are telling them all the time about changes to the law that they need to comply with, because it's not always true. Not always de facto do these laws really impact onto the clients. And even if you do have a market-driven UVP, which you're proposing, let's think about the GDPR thing from 2018, 2019. Yes, there were changes to GDPR and data protection. And yes, we do need to be market-driven and update our clients about to make sure they comply. And yes, it can generate a lot of work, but there's just this wave of work, and that wave can finish. And then all of your competitors are proposing the same thing at the same time, which means this value proposition will become commodified and lose its value, and you have to compete with other law firms suggesting the same thing, and there's always somebody cheaper. So while I can't honestly criticize a lawyer if they do a market-driven UVP, a market-driven IDA pitch, at least they're doing something in business development. It's much, much better if you do the opposite, which is a spontaneous UVP. If you yourself come up with an idea, a value proposition, if you yourself create a product or a solution and you take the initiative to pitch it to your clients, then you don't compete with the other law firms. You don't have the risk of commodification. You have control. You can do it whichever month, whichever quarter you want to do it. You can focus on whichever industry you want to do. It does mean that for a spontaneous UVP, you need to be creative and actually think and create and put together something that you can offer to the clients, of course. And I know that this can be difficult for many lawyers and law firms. I don't know why we don't have more flexibility and more imagination. I don't think it's that difficult. Actually, yeah, if you're interested in creating spontaneous UVPs to create the spontaneous products, email me and I can share you some ideas or some thoughts. It's a lot simpler than we might expect. Again, don't simply do compliance. You know, you have to comply with this, comply with that, or try to avoid the value proposition where you saying to the client, let me check this thing and I'll tell you if it's okay. And if it's not okay, then we'll solve it for you. Because again, the clients can get a little bit suspicious that perhaps you're just fishing for work, which to some degree we are. So we might need to be a little bit more creative. So a spontaneous UVP is much better than a market-driven UVP, although sometimes we have to use market-driven UVPs. And with our spontaneous UVP, we need to be sure to not repeat the same approach all the time, which is comply. If you could really offer, this would be a smart thing to do, not just a spontaneous UVP, but a bundled UVP. If it's really you and one of your friends, so you do something with the tax and real estate, you create a value proposition, or competition and employment, and you do a UVP. You know, I think you would actually find there is a synergy there. That if, and again, most law firms are really bad at this. Most law firms do not communicate between the practices. So most law firms are really terrible at cross-selling. So if you manage to make a value proposition which isn't simply practice-based, only focusing on your practice, let's say the corporate or the M&A or the bankruptcy, but with something which is integrated to another of the practices, some bundled UVP, your chances that you're going to hook the interest is higher. The chances that you're going to offer something holistic and with a more business perspective is higher, which is good for the client. And two heads are better than one. You know, you can do this. It would also improve your relations with the other colleagues in your team. You know, when I was working at Deloitte here in Prague for the last 3 years, when I was in charge of business development for Central and Eastern Europe, we had 1,500 people in the office. across all of the different service lines. So you basically had no idea who your work colleagues were. And even in legal, I think in Deloitte Legal, we had about 100 or more different colleagues. So quite often you wouldn't know what these other lawyers are doing. So this would be a good way to build relations with the other lawyers, understand their value propositions, understand their personalities, and this would be good for your internal selling. I think we mentioned this on the previous broadcast. This is what I saw. Okay, I shouldn't mention just Deloitte, but this is what I saw in many of the big international firms, international law firms, which I called wishful thinking. Wishful thinking is when you expect someone else is going to save you, someone else is going to sell you. So you do your presentation about your wonderful practice and you show your capabilities, and then you think everyone else is going to tell their clients about you and you're going to get work. No, probably not going to work. Nobody, well, quite often people are not even selling themselves, so you got less chance that they're going to start selling you. So avoid wishful thinking. And spontaneous UVPs could be a nice way to improve cross-selling as well. Now, on slide 11, we have this strange infographic, which is called the big idea. So this is like your inspiration. This is before you even do any of your sales writing, you have to work out what is your big idea. Not simply what is your UVP, not what the product is that you're offering, but you need to think about who is this product for? Who's the target audience? What's the problem that it solves? What actually is your product? What is this product UVP? And what's the benefits that it brings to the audience? So I think the first step in sales writing would be you identify, I mean, there's different ways you could do it, I suppose, but you need to have the big idea. So maybe you would think, what is the product? Then you might think, who's your target audience? Then what does that product actually solve? Does it prevent risk? Does it save time? Does it increase efficiency? Does it give an opportunity? And then what's the benefits that this product actually brings? So this, if we take a step back to one of our first lectures, this is where you would show the benefits of the product. You don't just focus on the features, the concrete characteristics of that product or solution, but you show what's the advantages, what's the good thing that these features give, and then the benefits, what are these benefits that come from it? So this is coming back to fab selling. I can't, oh dear, it doesn't seem to let me, oh, I think I can. So in the chat function, fab selling. So feature, advantage, benefit. So we covered this before. If you want a paper about it, I can send it to you. So in your big idea, you should be able to then formulate that into one sentence. So if I'm the big boss, if I'm the managing partner, I would say, okay, we're going to do an email campaign. Maybe we're even going to do a mail shot campaign. We're going to send this correspondence in physical letters to these targets. What's the big idea? So you would be then telling me, who is it for? What is it? What's the problem it solves? And what's the benefits? And be able to then put that into one sentence. So for example, you could say, any in-house counsel can save significant time per week through our XYZ contract automation solution, allowing mundane repetitive work to be cut down. That would be a big idea. We know that we're going to be pitching our IDAs to in-house counsels in different companies. We know that the problem that it's solving is the removal of repetitive work. We know that our product is something which we call the XYZ contract automation solution. And the benefit here is it saves time per week. So you should be able to formulate very clearly for yourself the big idea into one sentence. And then it's clear for you, who are you pitching? What are you pitching? What is the problem it solves? And what's the benefits it brings? Into one clear sentence. And once you have that big idea, then you would actually write the IDA itself. And this will help you when you're thinking about who you're pitching to and what are the results. You need to be able to communicate your big idea. Actually, that's quite a fun activity. If we were doing this as a group training, I would break us into little groups, and I would get us to formulate 1 or 2 or 3 big ideas, which would then be expanded into the IDA. So you have product UVP, then you can expand it into a big idea sentence, and then that big idea sentence you can formulate into the IDA email, or even change it into an IDA article. So be able to be clear about the big idea. And I like this concept because it forces us to think a little bit less like lawyers and more like business people. Business people are not simply interested in compliance with these laws and technical legal things. They want to understand problems and problems solutions and benefits of what you're offering. And again, it means you have to have a product-based approach to pitching. So if we really did want to have something like the XYZ contract management solution, so this is something maybe in the area of legal tech. So we have this technological solution, then we can help you with the installation and application of this and all of the legal issues connected to it. Then it means that we have something to offer, and it's kind of clear what's the benefits that's going to bring. So that's kind of cool. Next, on slide 12, we can see like this crosshairs. You need to be clear about how many people are you going to send your IDA article or your email to. A very common mistake that I've seen is when we're sending basically one. We have an idea, we have the big idea, and we make a personalized bespoke IDA and we send it to one target. So this is when we're being like a sniper. That's not bad. It has a good chance of conversion, but be careful, because if you spend too much time doing one tailored IDA and you get no response, you've just lost that time. And it can be demotivating for a lawyer as well. You think you have a cool big idea. You spend half an hour doing this IDA and sending it off, and they ignore you. And then you have to follow up to nuclear option. It can demotivate you. So I think you have to choose between if you're going to take a sniper approach to pitching your sales writing or a machine gun. The opposite extreme, rather than having a sniper, would be you have a hit list of 50 CEOs of certain companies in an industry. That's your target audience. And you're going to send that same IDA email to all of them. But of course, you're changing the personalization element and you're changing the name. So that can give you an advantage that you have mass pitching. And even if you have a conversion of only 5 or 10%, you will at least get some meetings from that. So maybe you send off these 50 emails. You do this by mail merge, like we talked in the lecture before last. You send off these 50 emails. Of these 50 emails, you get 5 meetings, which is okay, that's 10%. And of those 5 meetings, you get, let's be generous, 2 engagements, and then we can see the money. So messages, meetings, mandates, money. This is the 4M approach, which I developed at Deloitte. So there's a certain rationale here that you would have a smaller investment into the big idea and into the IDA writing, and you send it to a larger audience to play the numbers game that only a proportion of them will convert and come back to you. It's up to you. You really have to balance the time investment against the expected return on investment. But I would generally recommend avoiding both extremes. I wouldn't recommend spending a ton of time over preparation and then sending off an IDA alone. And I wouldn't recommend doing a really massive campaign, sending off, dozens and dozens or hundreds, because then there's less chance that your value proposition is going to be specifically good for your target audience. Actually, I can tell you a secret. One mistake that I've seen is over preparation and never pitching. So sometimes a lawyer or a partner, maybe they're not motivated, or maybe they're just disorganized. They have a product UVP, they have some kind of idea, they do too much research, they begin to draft this email, they make it far too long and complicated. 3 weeks later, you come back to them and they haven't even sent it. So that's a scenario to avoid. Don't do oh my God, so much preparation that you don't actually ever send off the email. I think the best AIDA, the best sales writing would be something maybe that you could write within 5 minutes. If you have the product UVP. So you just write very simply, salutation, personalization, awareness, interest, desire, action, best regards, and you send it off. And maybe you copy paste and you send it to 3 or 4 or 5 other of your current and ex-clients. And then you track the results. You see which of these become hires and fires, advances, continuation, and you have to track the results because we know that the follow-up is critical, that if they don't respond, you're going to call them, and then you're going to do a follow-up email, and you follow up to nuclear option. So be careful in terms of your, if you're going to work like a sniper or like a machine gun in sales writing. And the next slide 13, it has 2 pictures, because I think these kind of go hand in hand, and they relate to the previous topic as well. You need to know who's your target audience. You should have an ideal prospect. So in the previous example, we were just going for in-house legal counsel, but we could develop this further. And if you're using something like Sales Navigator, which I strongly recommend for research and prospecting in business development, this paid license from LinkedIn each month, then you could go further, not simply in-house legal counsel. We want them to be of a certain age, of a certain seniority. So let's say between 30 and 50 years old. We want them to be in a certain industry, so heavy industry. We want them to be in a certain jurisdiction. So we should create our ideal target audience. By better defining who your target audience is, you can better tailor your AIDA and your message that you're pitching to them, so you get a higher response rate. That's one thing. Don't do this crazy thing. Oh my gosh, I saw this happen in Russia so many times. And I think it wasn't just the Russians who are guilty of it, that they would have a very primitive segmentation of target audience, foreigners and Russians. So we're going to send something out in English. We send it to all the foreigners because they have money and they're going to pay us lots of money. That's fantastic. And then we've got something in Russian, which we're going to send to the Russians, and we don't think they're going to pay us so much. So it's a slightly different value proposition. That's a very primitive segmentation. Have a more sophisticated understanding of your target audience and a little bit better research, then your conversion ratios will be higher. The message will be more targeted to them. And the second slide, I put these 2 concepts together on slide 13, is remember, this is a little bit provocative, I'll even write it into the chat. You are not a lawyer. You're not. You're not a lawyer. You are a trusted business partner. Put that into the chat. This means that from the perspective of the client, and especially for doing sales writing, you need to think like a trusted business partner. You're helping them to get to where they want to go. You're not just looking very narrowly at a single legal practice with your objective of writing 20-page memoranda and doing billable hours. You're a trusted business partner. You're thinking holistically. You're thinking proactively. You have a business focus. A lot of young lawyers and associates, even senior associates, some partners, are not trusted business partners. They're just lawyers. You're not going to have so much commercial success and rapport and chemistry and credibility unless you become a trusted business partner. So that's a little bit of a provocation for you. You're not just a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. Trusted business partner. And think of things from the perspective of the client to help the client to go where they want to go. And if you are a trusted business partner and you have your very clearly defined target audience, like on slide 13, then you know who you're going to reach out to. And then like the previous concept, you know if you're going to send it like a sniper or a machine gun, how many of these AIDA pitches are you going to be proposing your big idea to? On slide 14, we can then even look at conversion. Again, let's make it a little bit more sophisticated. Conversion is changing a potential client into a client. So usually in legal services, it's not so simple that you send off some emails and you get some mandates. It's possible. You send off 5 AIDAs and someone says, yes, please take our money. You're hired. That's fantastic. Unfortunately, we usually have to go through that intermediary step of getting the meetings. So in the example where we sent off 50 IDA emails, and our primary conversion was that we got 5 meetings. That's good. Secondary conversion was that we got 2 mandates. So we can think of conversion on different levels: primary, secondary, tertiary conversion, even tertiary. Each of these would be different steps in conversion. And the more steps in conversion there would be for the more significant sales. If you were going to do something like a really big merger for a client, you would have to look at it in terms of primary conversion, secondary conversion, tertiary conversion, and these would have a longer sales cycle. Okay, we can just think of conversion, but we can think of different levels of the conversion that can come through. If you have a very long, complex conversion ratio, so this number, this number, this number, this number, that's where you'd look at primary, secondary, tertiary conversion. And it's easier for us to then keep track of it, about what's going on. The next slide is where we take a step back. And I've already mentioned this before, so this is slide 14, the personalization element. The worst thing that you can do in sales writing is to write something like, I hope this email finds you well. This is terrible. It's impersonal, it's cold, it's cliche, it's unfriendly. A good personalization element is the equivalent of small talk with your client. You should use this in your emails. So between the salutation and the awareness, you have this one sentence which shows, the client, you think of them, that this isn't a mass spam, even if it is. You would need to change the personalization element, perhaps. So, for example, if you don't say, I hope this email finds you well, you say something like, I hope you enjoyed your weekend skiing trip in Austria and are recharged for the week ahead. That shows that you know that they went to Austria because you're friends with them on Facebook, because you're connected in LinkedIn, because you had a coffee last week, because you have a good rapport and chemistry with your client. So put a little bit of time and thought into the personalization element. And these cliche expressions, which are basically just fluff, they add no value to sales writing. I hope this email finds you well. Never do that. I look forward to hearing from you. It's fluff. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions. No, rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. You can be polite, you can put these in, but they don't actually achieve anything. So if you're going to do a personalization element, make sure it's personal. If you want to have a CTA, a call to action, don't say, please contact us if you have any questions. Say, let's do lunch on Tuesday at 2 or a coffee on Friday at 5. That is an XY close. You might not just say, let's meet on Tuesday at 2, because they're busy perhaps on Tuesday at 2. You give them 2 choices, Tuesday at 2, Friday at 5. They can choose between them. There's more chance that they would choose one of them. That's an XY close. So yeah, be careful to include a personalization element and make sure that it's actually personal. Another thing, the next picture is called storytelling. You could even formulate your entire IDA into a story, like you're telling them some news. So storytelling is much more engaging than a dry technical IDA. So awareness, interest, desire, action. Tell them some news. Tell them a story, some happy ending or sad ending. Hopefully your story is true, and that's going to be much more memorable and engaging than a simple dry technical IDA. On slide 17, we also need to keep in mind the cost per, how do we call this, mail shot cost. That in the same way that we have to decide whether to be a sniper or a machine gun in electronic mail and balance the cost in a time investment per pitch, the thing applies to mail shot in the same way in terms of physical cost, the mail shot cost. What is, if you're going to send an envelope with a letter, with a business card, with a brochure, with whatever, there's going to be a cost. The higher the cost, probably the higher the response. You might even send a lumpy mail shot, which would not just be a brochure, might be a book. So mail shot cost is in terms of money, and probably the more money has a higher chance of conversion, but it's more risky. And email pitching, that has a time cost. The more personalized and sniper-like, the higher the time cost. The more machine gun, the less the time cost. So you can look at both of these type of costs in terms of time or money, and there would be an equivalence between them. The more time and the more money you invest, the higher the conversion, but the higher the risk, because if they don't buy from you, then you lose your investment. Again, you need to get a balance. The next slide is, I call it the buyer-seller scales. And I'm just noticing the time. I'm taking too long on this live stream. So we're going to finish in a few minutes. The buyer-seller scales means when you send an email to someone, they don't know if you're asking them to buy their services or if you're trying to sell something to them. If you're asking to buy, you have a very high chance of response because people respond to purchase emails. If you're offering to sell, you have a lower chance of response. If someone categorizes your IDA immediately as being a sales pitch, they might not respond. They might have an automatic denial. So you can rebalance this. You can rebalance the buyer-seller scales in terms of your IDA. Don't make it too salesy, because the best sales writing doesn't look like sales writing, but leave perhaps an open ambiguity for cooperation. If you make a gray area between if you're a buyer or a seller, you can then have that kind of flexibility, that curiosity about cooperation, collaboration. There's more chance that they're going to agree to speak with you. There are ethical issues here. If you pretend you're interested in buying, when in reality you're wanting to be selling, they're going to get mad at you when they find out that you did that. So you can get yourself into trouble. But we can look at our writing, our sales writing, not simply from the perspective of direct sales, but are there avenues for cooperation? Is there something interesting we could find out from them? Is there some news we would like to hear? So you can think of this in terms of the buyer-seller scales. If you can shift it away from being pure sale and a little bit in the buy area, maybe there's an opportunity there to increase your conversion. This is a controversial issue. The last two slides, the next slide is a micro pitch. IDA is 4 or 5 sentences in an email. That's much better than typical legal newsletter, which is dozens and dozens of paragraphs. A micro pitch is when you simply send one sentence as your sales writing. Dear Thomas, I think there's competition issues on that transaction. Shall I introduce Susan, our antitrust expert? ? You sent it off. That's one email. Micro pitch is even shorter than an IDA. Micro pitch can be read on someone's telephone, and the chance of conversion is quite high. So the briefer the email, the higher the conversion. So you can have an IDA, and you can have micro pitch. Micro pitch works best, of course, with good current clients or raving fans, especially. And then the last slide there, guys, is RRR, reflexive rejection response. You're going to encounter this as a lawyer. Sooner or later, you're going to pitch, you're going to propose something, either in conversation, at a networking event, or in public speaking in a presentation, or by sales writing. And you get the response, not interested. No, thank you. They haven't even listened to you. They haven't even paid attention to what you're saying. So sometimes people just don't want to be sold to, and they will do RRR, reflexive rejection response. How do you overcome the reflexive rejection response? You ask them, what aren't you interested in? This can get a little bit you need to be careful you don't become a little bit aggressive in your sales. But if you can engage them to find out what they're not interested in, then you can overcome those objections. So if they say, we don't have budget, again, that's another rubbish excuse. You can say, well, okay, let's look at what we can do in 2023. Or, if you can begin to dig into the real reasons for the rejection, you have a chance of building a rapport and overcoming it. If you get a RRR, reflexive rejection response, you have a choice. Either accept it, they're not listening, and then you pitch to someone's higher and more important than them, or just move on. Or you don't have to accept an RRR. reflexive rejection response, you can ask them why, and you try and dig a little bit deeper into that to build that rapport, and then you can still have a chance of a sale. Okay, so we've covered the 16 main concepts for today. On slide number 21, you can see there are some of the next steps. Again, you can email me, I can send you the slides and the transcripts and so on. And then on slide 22, I updated this. I'm going to be quite busy in the next couple of months. You can see that in January 2023, I'm in Budapest, at Belgrade, Zagreb, and Ljubljana. Those are my dates. Then I have my Aegean tour. I'm in Turkey, Cyprus, and Greece. Then I have my Baltic tour, Warsaw, Vilnius, Riga, Tallinn, and Helsinki. And then there's a few other visits like Frankfurt, Valletta, Chisinau, Vienna, and Bucharest later in February. So again, if you see that I'm going to be around in any of your cities or your countries, drop me a line. I'm happy to meet, to have a coffee. I promise not to do hard sell on you. And actually, in any case, I'm going to be in each of these cities because I have clients there. I have law firms and lawyers that I'm going to be working with. So I'm going to still be around. And in most of the time, I do have some time. It's rare that I get totally booked out from very morning to very evening. Okay, so let's wrap up. I think, what can I say? Sales writing is a huge opportunity. Sales writing is something which is in your comfort zone. You don't need to be an extrovert. You don't need to be outgoing and social to do sales writing. You can stay at the safety and comfort of the office. You can send off your IDAs. You can do your articles. But the main idea from sales writing is you have to have a product. What is your product UVP? Can you explain that clearly is a big idea, which means, do you know who's your target audience? Do you know what is the product you're offering? What's the problem it solves? What the benefit it brings? Your objective in sales writing is to get meetings, because you're unlikely just to have a primary conversion and then people give you money to hire you. You want to get meetings. And you need to take an experimental approach. And we can make our sales writing more and more sophisticated. We don't just need to limit ourselves to the AIDA structure. We can also do micro pitches. And if you're going to do something like an AIDA structure, you can begin to throw in those other elements. Like, you don't just need to have a CTA at the end. You can have an XY close. You can use the Duracell element, Oggy's element, the PS element. I emailed you earlier this paper about 13 common elements in sales writing. So that's got more information. Or if you don't have it, email me and I'll send it to you. Okay, we've gone 7 minutes over and I didn't even leave time for questions and answers. And I couldn't share the slides today. At least you have them. If you have questions, drop me an email just now while it's still fresh in mind. And then I hope to see you next Thursday, where we're going to start the third topic, which is sales networking. So for January, we have sales networking 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to look at how do you monetize and get money, get mandates from going to networking events, business breakfasts, webinars, all of these kind of places where you can network. We're going to look at how to actually do that and make it work from a financial perspective. All right, so I should wrap up now. Thanks very much for being today, especially just a couple of days before New Year. Have a lovely New Year. Thank you too, Jurgita. And I look forward to seeing you in 2023 when we start sales networking. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.